Hey everyone, welcome back to my channel. Today I'm going to tell you a story that's been eating at me for months. A story about betrayal, corporate greed, and what happens when you push the wrong person too far. This isn't some fictional tale. This really happened, and by the end of this video you'll understand why I can never show my face on camera. My name? Well, let's call me Alex. I'm 42 years old, and until 6 months ago, I was the senior systems engineer at North Star Technical Solutions in Phoenix, Arizona. For 18 years, I kept their entire digital infrastructure running. Every server, every network, every line of code that kept that company breathing. That was my domain. But this story isn't just about me. It's about what happens when bean counters think they can replace experience with cheap labor, when corporate executives gamble with systems they don't understand, and when loyalty means nothing in the face of quarterly profit margins. Let me take you back to where it all began. I started at North Star fresh out of college in 2006. The company was smaller then, maybe 200 employees, specializing in custom software solutions for healthcare systems. Real precision work. When you're dealing with patient data and life support systems, there's no room for error. My first boss was Margaret Chen, a brilliant woman who'd built the entire IT department from the ground up. She taught me that technology isn't just about making things work. It's about making them work reliably, securely, and efficiently. Under her guidance, I learned every system inside and out. When Margaret retired in 2010, I was the natural choice for her replacement. By then, North Star had grown to 500 employees, and our client list included some of the biggest hospital networks in the Southwest. The responsibility was enormous, but I was ready for it. Over the next 14 years, I built something I was proud of. Zero data breaches, 99.97% uptime, a team of 12 brilliant engineers who could handle any crisis. We weren't just the IT department. We were the nervous system of the entire company. I implemented redundant backup systems, created detailed documentation for every process, and established security protocols that passed every audit with flying colors. When other companies were getting hit with ransomware attacks, North Star remained untouchable. When servers crashed at our competitors, our systems kept humming. But success, as I learned, can make you a target. In early 2023, rumors started circulating about a potential buyout. North Star had caught the attention of Apex Capital Group, one of those private equity firms that devours companies like a swarm of locusts. They promised increased efficiency, expanded market reach, and better resources for growth. What they really meant was cost-cutting, layoffs, and the systematic dismantling of everything that made North Star successful. The acquisition was finalized in June 2023. Within a week, Apex had installed their own management team. Out went CEO Patricia Morrison, who'd grown the company from a startup to an industry leader. In came Marcus Sterling, a 35-year-old MBA with a Harvard degree and zero experience in healthcare technology. I should have seen the writing on the wall when Sterling called his first all-hands meeting. He stood up there in his $3,000 suit, clicking through PowerPoint slides about operational efficiency and digital transformation, using buzzwords he'd probably learned in business school the week before. "We're going to modernize North Star's technology stack," he announced. "Move to cloud-based solutions, implement AI-driven processes, and streamline our workforce to match industry best practices." Translation: we're going to fire expensive employees and replace them with cheaper alternatives, regardless of the consequences. After the meeting, I approached Sterling directly. "Marcus, I'd like to discuss the IT infrastructure transition. There are some critical systems that require specialized knowledge to maintain." He barely looked up from his phone. "Alex, right? Don't worry about it. We've got consultants coming in to assess everything. They'll handle the technical details." Consultants. The word made my blood run cold. I'd seen what happened when companies brought in outside consultants to optimize their IT systems. They'd come in with their generic solutions, ignore the unique requirements that made everything work, and leave behind a broken mess for someone else to clean up. But I tried to stay optimistic. Maybe these consultants would be different. Maybe they'd recognize the value of what we'd built and work with us to improve it rather than replace it. I was about to learn just how naive that thinking was. 2 weeks later, they showed up. Meridian Technologies, a consulting firm that specialized in digital transformation for mid-sized companies. Their team was led by a guy named Brad Hutchinson, a 28-year-old who introduced himself as a senior cloud architect despite having graduated from college just 5 years earlier. Brad and his team of 4 junior consultants set up shop in the conference room and immediately began assessing our infrastructure. They spent exactly 3 days reviewing our systems before presenting their recommendations to Sterling and the executive team. I wasn't invited to that presentation. Instead, I learned about their conclusions secondhand when my direct report, Sarah Kim, came to my office looking shell-shocked. "Alex, you need to see this," she said, handing me a printed email. "They're planning to migrate everything to AWS within 6 months. All of it. The custom applications, the database systems, the security protocols. Everything." I scanned the document, my heart sinking with every line. They wanted to replace our carefully crafted, highly specialized systems with generic cloud solutions. Systems that had been designed specifically for healthcare compliance, built to handle the unique requirements of our clients, tested and refined over years of operation. "What about the legacy integrations?" I asked. "Half our clients are still running systems from the early 2000s. Our custom APIs are the only thing keeping them connected." Sarah shook her head. "According to this, those will be deprecated in favor of modern integration standards." I felt a chill run down my spine. Those legacy integrations weren't just nice-to-have features. They were mission-critical connections that kept patient data flowing between systems. Hospitals relied on them to coordinate care, track medications, and maintain accurate records. If those connections failed, I immediately requested a meeting with Sterling to discuss the migration plan. To his credit, he agreed to see me, though he seemed annoyed by the interruption. "Alex, I appreciate your concern," he said, not looking up from his laptop. "But we need to trust the experts on this. Meridian has successfully migrated dozens of companies to cloud-based solutions. They know what they're doing. Marcus, with respect, they don't understand our specific requirements. We're not just any company. We're handling protected health information for major hospital networks. The compliance requirements alone will be handled by AWS's built-in security features," he interrupted. "Look, I get it. Change is hard, but we can't keep running on outdated systems forever. The board expects us to modernize, and that's exactly what we're going to do." I tried a different approach. "What if we do a phased migration? Start with non-critical systems, test everything thoroughly, make sure the integrations work properly before moving the core infrastructure?" Sterling finally looked up from his laptop. "Alex, the timeline is already set. Meridian has guaranteed full migration within 6 months, and we're holding them to that schedule. I need you to work with Brad to ensure a smooth transition." That was it. Discussion over. Decision made by people who had never touched a line of code, never stayed up all night troubleshooting a critical system failure, never felt the weight of responsibility that comes with knowing that thousands of people depend on your work. But I wasn't ready to give up. Not yet. Over the next 2 weeks, I worked closely with Brad and his team, trying to educate them about our system's complexities. I showed them the custom security protocols, explained the intricate database relationships, walked them through the legacy integration points that kept our clients' systems talking to each other. Brad nodded along, taking notes on his tablet, asking what seemed like intelligent questions. But I could tell he wasn't really listening. In his mind, our systems were just obstacles to overcome, problems to be solved with the latest cloud technologies. This is pretty complex stuff, he admitted during one of our sessions. But once we get everything migrated to AWS, it'll be much simpler to manage. Everything will be standardized, automated, scalable. Brad, these systems aren't complex by accident, I explained. They're complex because healthcare is complex. Every custom function, every specialized protocol, they exist for a reason. They solve real problems for real people. He smiled, that patronizing smile I was becoming familiar with. I understand your attachment to the current setup, Alex. You've put a lot of work into it. But sometimes you have to let go of the past to embrace the future. That's when I realized they weren't just planning to replace our systems. They were planning to replace us. The entire IT department. Why pay experienced engineers to maintain custom solutions when you could have a couple of junior developers manage standardized cloud services? I started making preparations. Not for sabotage, I'm not that kind of person, but for documentation. I began creating detailed records of every system, every integration, every potential failure point. If they were determined to tear down what we'd built, at least I could leave them with a roadmap of what they were destroying. My team sensed what was coming. Sarah, Mike, Jennifer, Carlos, they'd all been through corporate restructuring before. They knew the signs. "How bad is it going to be?" Mike asked during one of our weekly team meetings. I couldn't sugarcoat it. Bad. They're planning to replace most of our infrastructure with cloud services. That means they won't need most of us to maintain it. "What about the specialized knowledge?" Jennifer asked. "The custom applications, the client integrations. They think it can all be documented and handed off to junior developers," I said. "They don't understand that some knowledge can't be transferred through documentation alone." Over the following weeks, I watched my team members start updating their resumes, reaching out to contacts at other companies, preparing for the inevitable. I couldn't blame them. They had families to support, careers to protect. But it broke my heart to see 18 years of institutional knowledge walking out the door. Then came the first major test of Meridian's cloud migration strategy. It happened on a Tuesday morning in October. Brad's team had been working on migrating our email systems to Office 365, a simple project that they said would demonstrate the benefits of cloud migration. They'd scheduled the cutover for Monday night, planning to have everything running smoothly by Tuesday morning. Instead, I arrived at the office to find chaos. Half the company couldn't access their email. The other half could log in but couldn't send messages. And our automated systems, the ones that sent critical alerts to hospital administrators, were completely offline. My phone was ringing before I even sat down. "Alex, thank God," came the voice of Dr. Patricia Hawkins from Mesa General Hospital. "Our medication tracking system isn't receiving updates from your servers. We've got patients in the ICU and we can't verify their drug interactions." This was exactly the kind of situation I'd been dreading. When you're dealing with healthcare systems, downtime isn't just an inconvenience. It's a matter of life and death. I immediately started troubleshooting while fielding calls from increasingly panicked clients. The problem was clear. Meridian's migration had broken our email authentication systems, which several clients relied on for secure communications. But when I tried to implement a fix, I discovered that Brad's team had already deleted the old email servers as part of their cleanup process. The rollback plan they'd assured us existed was, in fact, non-existent. "We can rebuild the authentication system in the cloud," Brad insisted when I confronted him. "It'll just take a few days." A few days? I couldn't believe what I was hearing. We have hospitals that can't verify patient medications. We have clinics that can't receive lab results. This needs to be fixed in hours, not days. That's when I made the decision that would ultimately lead to my downfall. I implemented an emergency workaround using a backup server that I'd maintained off the books, a system that wasn't part of the official infrastructure, but that I'd kept running as insurance against exactly this kind of disaster. Within 4 hours, all client communications were restored. Crisis averted. But I'd violated the new protocols by using unauthorized systems, and Sterling was not happy about it. "Alex, I appreciate your quick thinking," he said during the post-incident review, "but we can't have people going rogue and implementing unauthorized solutions. We need to follow proper procedures." "Marcus, the proper procedures failed," I pointed out. "If I hadn't intervened, we'd still be down, and our clients would be looking for new vendors." "That's exactly why we need to complete the migration quickly," he replied. "These legacy systems are too fragile. Once everything's in the cloud, we won't have these problems anymore." I wanted to explain that the problem wasn't the legacy systems. It was the rushed migration timeline and the lack of proper testing. But I could see in his eyes that he'd already made up his mind. I was the problem. My systems were the problem. The solution was to get rid of both as quickly as possible. 2 weeks later, I received an email that would change everything. The email came from HR Director Jessica Walsh on a Friday afternoon. "Alex, please see me in my office at 4 p.m. to discuss your role transition." Role transition, corporate speak for "you're fired." I'd been expecting it for weeks, but it still hit like a punch to the gut. 18 years of my life gone with an email appointment. When I walked into Jessica's office, Sterling was already there, along with Brad from Meridian. This wasn't going to be a discussion, it was an execution. "Alex, we've decided to restructure the IT department to better align with our modernization goals," Jessica began, reading from a prepared script. "Your position is being eliminated as part of this organizational change." I looked at Sterling. "What about the ongoing migration? The client relationships? The institutional knowledge that keeps everything running?" "Brad will be taking over as interim IT director," Sterling replied. "Meridian will handle the technical aspects of the transition, and we'll be hiring a new permanent director once the migration is complete." I almost laughed. Brad, who'd been with the company for 8 weeks and had already caused one major outage, was going to replace me. A consultant with no stake in the company's success, no understanding of our clients' needs, no experience with healthcare systems. "I'll need 2 weeks to document the critical systems and train the transition team," I said. "That won't be necessary," Sterling replied curtly. "We have your existing documentation, and Brad's team is fully briefed on the infrastructure. Your access will be terminated today." Today. They wanted me gone immediately, with no transition period, no knowledge transfer, no opportunity to ensure continuity of operations. Jessica slid a severance package across the desk. "You'll receive 12 weeks of pay, continuation of health benefits for 6 months, and a positive reference for future employment. In exchange, you'll sign this non-disclosure agreement and non-compete clause." I flipped through the documents. The severance was less than I'd expected, and the non-compete would prevent me from working for any healthcare technology company for 2 years. But what really caught my attention was the non-disclosure agreement. It was unusually broad, preventing me from discussing any aspect of North Star's operations, including safety concerns or regulatory compliance issues. "I'll need to review this with my attorney," I said. "Of course," Jessica replied, "but we'll need your decision by Monday. If you don't sign, the severance offer is withdrawn." They were forcing my hand, giving me no time to negotiate or even fully understand what I was agreeing to. But with a mortgage and no other immediate prospects, I didn't have much choice. I signed the documents and handed over my badge, my laptop, and my keys. 18 years of my career, reduced to a cardboard box of personal items and a security escort to the parking garage. As I drove home that evening, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was abandoning my team, my clients, and the systems I'd spent decades perfecting. But there was nothing I could do about it now. Or so I thought. The first call came 3 days after my termination. It was Sarah, my former lead developer, calling from her personal phone. "Alex, we need to talk," she said, her voice tense. "Can you meet me for coffee? Somewhere away from the office?" An hour later, we sat in a small cafe across town, and Sarah filled me in on what was happening at North Star in my absence. "It's a disaster," she said quietly. "Brad's team has been making changes without understanding the dependencies. They broke the billing system yesterday, and it took us 6 hours to figure out what they'd done. They're supposed to be documenting everything, but they're not asking the right questions." "What about the healthcare compliance systems?" I asked. "The HIPAA protocols, the audit trails?" Sarah's expression darkened. "They're treating them like any other database. They don't understand that patient data requires special handling. Yesterday, I caught one of their junior developers trying to copy production data to a test environment without encryption. My blood ran cold. A HIPAA violation like that could result in millions of dollars in fines and criminal charges for the executives responsible. "Did you report it?" I asked. I tried to, but Brad said it was just a test environment and that I was being overly cautious. He told me to focus on my assigned tasks and let them handle the security concerns. Over the next 2 weeks, I received similar calls from other former team members. Mike reported that the backup systems were failing because nobody understood the custom scripts that maintained them. Jennifer discovered that the database replication processes had been simplified in a way that actually made them more vulnerable to corruption. Each conversation was more disturbing than the last. My replacements weren't just failing to maintain the systems I'd built. They were actively making them less secure, less reliable, and less compliant with healthcare regulations. But the most troubling call came from Carlos, who'd been the only member of my team retained after the layoffs. "Alex, I think they're planning something big," he said during a late-night phone call. "Sterling's been in meetings with the Apex executives, and I overheard them talking about accelerating the timeline and accepting temporary risks for long-term gains." "What kind of risks?" I asked. "They want to migrate the core patient data systems next month, ahead of schedule. They're talking about doing it over a weekend with minimal testing. Brad's convinced them that the cloud migration will solve all the reliability problems." I felt sick. The core patient data systems were the heart of our entire operation. They handled medical records for over 200,000 patients across 12 hospital networks. A failure during migration could corrupt years of medical history, disrupt ongoing treatments, and potentially put lives at risk. "Carlos, you have to document everything," I said. "Every decision, every risk they're taking, every corner they're cutting. If something goes wrong, there needs to be a record." "I'm trying, but they're limiting my access to systems. They say I don't need to know about the migration details since I'm not part of the project team." That's when I realized that Sterling and his team weren't just incompetent. They were deliberately excluding the remaining experienced staff from critical decisions. They didn't want witnesses to what they were planning. I made a decision that night that would change everything. I was going to stop them, whatever it took. I spent the next week reaching out to every contact I had in the healthcare industry. Former colleagues, clients, regulatory officials, anyone who might have influence over North Star's operations or oversight responsibilities. My first call was to Dr. Michael Rodriguez, the Chief Information Officer at Phoenix Children's Hospital, one of North Star's largest clients. "Mike, I need to talk to you about some concerns regarding North Star's system migration," I said carefully, mindful of the NDA I'd signed. Alex, good to hear from you. We were wondering what happened. Your replacement doesn't seem to understand our integration requirements. We've had 3 minor outages in the past month. I chose my words carefully. I can't discuss internal company matters, but I'd strongly recommend that you conduct an independent security audit of any systems that handle your patient data, especially if you hear about any major infrastructure changes. There was a pause. That bad? I can't say more, but as a friend, I'd want you to be prepared. Similar conversations with other CIOs yielded the same response: concern about recent system instabilities and appreciation for the heads-up about potential security risks. My second approach was through regulatory channels. I contacted Amanda Foster, a compliance officer at the Arizona Department of Health Services, who I'd worked with on several audits over the years. Amanda, I'm calling to report potential HIPAA compliance issues at a healthcare technology company, I said. I can't provide specific details due to legal restrictions, but I believe there may be unauthorized access to protected health information. Can you give me the company name? She asked. I'd prefer to remain anonymous for now, but I can provide documentation if you initiate an investigation. Send me what you have. We'll look into it. That evening, I compiled everything I knew about the security vulnerabilities, compliance failures, and risky migration plans. I couldn't use insider information due to my NDA, but I could piece together a compelling case using publicly available information and the observations of concerned healthcare professionals. The document I created was 23 pages long and detailed multiple potential violations of healthcare data protection regulations. I sent it anonymously to the Department of Health Services, along with contact information for several CIOs who could provide first-hand accounts of system failures. Then I waited. The regulatory response was faster than I'd expected. Within a week, Amanda called me back. "We're opening a formal investigation," she said. "The concerns you raised are serious enough to warrant immediate attention. We'll be conducting an unannounced audit of their systems within the next 2 weeks." I felt a mixture of relief and anxiety. Relief that someone was finally taking the situation seriously, but anxiety about what would happen when Sterling realized I was behind the investigation. My anxiety was justified. 3 days later, Carlos called me in a panic. "They know, Alex. Someone told them about the regulatory investigation, and they're going crazy. Sterling's brought in a crisis management firm, and they're working around the clock to clean up the systems before the audit." "What kind of cleanup?" I asked. "They're trying to patch all the security holes, restore the backup processes, and fix the compliance issues. But they're doing it so fast that they're breaking other things. The whole infrastructure is becoming unstable." This was exactly what I'd been afraid of. In their panic to avoid regulatory penalties, they were making hasty changes that could cause even more serious problems. "Carlos, you need to document everything they're doing. If they're making the systems less stable in order to pass an audit, that needs to be on record." "I'm trying, but they've restricted my access even further. I'm basically locked out of all the critical systems now." That's when I learned about the legal threat that was coming my way. The letter arrived by certified mail on a Thursday morning. North Star's attorneys were accusing me of corporate espionage, violation of trade secrets, and tortious interference with business relationships. They were threatening to seek millions in damages and demanding that I cease all contact with their clients and regulatory agencies. I immediately called my attorney, David Park, who I'd worked with on some contract negotiations years earlier. "They're trying to intimidate you into silence," David said after reviewing the letter. "Most of their claims are baseless, but they could tie you up in expensive litigation for years if they wanted to." "Can they actually prove I violated my NDA?" I asked. "That's the tricky part. You haven't disclosed any proprietary information, but they could argue that your actions damaged their business relationships. It's a stretch, But corporate lawyers file frivolous lawsuits all the time. What are my options? You could back down and hope they leave you alone, or you could fight back. But fighting back means exposing yourself to even more legal risk. I thought about it for exactly 3 seconds. I'm not backing down. People's lives are at stake. Then we need to build a strong defense. Do you have any evidence that they were actually violating regulations or putting patients at risk? I smiled. As a matter of fact, I do. Over the next week, I worked with David to compile a comprehensive defense strategy. We couldn't use any proprietary information from North Star, but we could document the publicly observable consequences of their mismanagement. The key was Carlos, who had been carefully documenting every system failure, every security breach, and every compliance violation since my departure. He'd created detailed logs showing that patient data had been exposed, that backup systems had failed, and that critical infrastructure was becoming increasingly unstable. But we needed more than just documentation. We needed witnesses who could testify about the real-world impact of these failures. That's where my network of healthcare professionals became crucial. Dr. Patricia Hawkins from Mesa General was the first to agree to provide testimony. "Alex, what they're doing is unconscionable," she said during a conference call with my attorney. "We've had 4 separate incidents where patient data was corrupted or unavailable. In one case, we couldn't access a patient's allergy information during an emergency procedure. Dr. Rodriguez from Phoenix Children's Hospital was equally willing to help. The system instabilities are becoming dangerous," he testified. "We're having to implement manual backup procedures for critical functions because we can't trust the automated systems anymore." Within 2 weeks, we had sworn statements from 12 different healthcare facilities documenting problems with North Star systems. The pattern was clear. The company's rush to modernize had created significant risks to patient safety and data security. But the most damaging evidence came from an unexpected source. I was working in my home office late one evening when my doorbell rang. Through the peephole, I could see a young woman I didn't recognize, looking nervously around the neighborhood. "Are you Alex?" she asked when I opened the door. "Who's asking?" "My name is Jennifer Walsh. I'm a developer at Meridian Technologies. I think we need to talk." I invited her in, curious about what Brad's teammate wanted to discuss. "I've been working on the North Star migration project," she began, "and I've discovered some things that really concern me. I think my company has been lying to the client about the risks involved in the migration." She pulled out a thumb drive. "These are internal emails and project documents from Meridian. They show that Brad and the other senior consultants knew the migration timeline was unrealistic, that the testing protocols were inadequate, and that the security implementations were substandard." I plugged the drive into my laptop and started reviewing the files. What I saw made my blood boil. Email after email showed Meridian's leadership discussing how to hide problems from North Star's executives, how to blame system failures on legacy infrastructure issues, and how to fast-track dangerous changes to meet contractual deadlines. One email from Brad to his manager was particularly damning. "The client doesn't understand the technical risks, and we're not going to educate them. Our job is to deliver on time and on budget. If there are problems after go-live, we'll deal with them then." Another email discussed billing strategies. "We can charge premium rates for emergency fixes to problems we know will occur. It's more profitable than doing the job right the first time." "Why are you showing me this?" I asked Jennifer. "Because I got into this field to help people, not to put them at risk for corporate profits. When I learned that we're dealing with healthcare systems, systems that people depend on for medical care, it became a moral issue for me. You know this could cost you your job, maybe even your career." She nodded. "I've already started looking for other work. I can't be part of this anymore." Jennifer's evidence was the smoking gun we needed. It proved that North Star's problems weren't due to legacy system issues or employee resistance to change. They were the direct result of consultant fraud and corporate negligence. But as we prepared to expose the truth, North Star's leadership made a decision that would force our hand. Carlos called me at 6 a.m. on a Monday morning, his voice tight with panic. Alex, they're doing it. They're migrating the core patient database this weekend, all of it. No phased approach, no extended testing period, no rollback plan. Sterling wants it done before the regulatory audit next week. I felt my heart sink. This was the worst-case scenario I'd been dreading. The core database contained medical records for over 200,000 patients. A failed migration could corrupt decades of medical history, disrupt ongoing treatments, and potentially cause life-threatening delays in patient care. Who's handling the technical implementation? I asked. Brad's team, with some offshore contractors they brought in to meet the timeline. None of them have healthcare experience, and they're working with database schemas they don't understand. Carlos, you have to stop this. Find a way to delay the migration. Report it to someone, anything. I tried. I raised my concerns with Sterling directly, but he said the decision was final. He told me that if I wasn't willing to support the company's modernization efforts, maybe I should look for work elsewhere. I hung up the phone and immediately called David, my attorney. We need to file an emergency injunction, I said. They're about to do something that could put thousands of patients at risk. On what grounds? David asked. You're not an employee anymore and you don't have legal standing to intervene in their business decisions. What about the healthcare facilities? They're the ones who will be affected if the migration fails. That's a better approach. Let me reach out to some of the CIOs who provided statements. If they're willing to file a joint petition. Within hours, we had assembled a coalition of 5 major healthcare facilities, represented by one of Phoenix's top healthcare law firms. They filed an emergency motion seeking to halt the database migration pending a thorough risk assessment. But corporate lawyers work fast when their clients' profits are threatened. North Star's response was swift and aggressive. They filed motions to dismiss our petition, claiming that their former clients were engaging in industrial espionage and that I was orchestrating a malicious campaign to damage their business. They also escalated their personal legal threats against me. Sterling himself called me directly, his voice cold with anger. Alex, I know you're behind this. You're trying to destroy this company because you're bitter about being replaced. But you're not going to succeed. We have evidence that you violated your NDA, and we're prepared to pursue criminal charges if necessary. Your NDA, and we're prepared to pursue criminal charges if necessary. Marcus, this isn't about revenge. It's about preventing a disaster that could hurt innocent people. The only disaster here is your campaign of sabotage. The migration is happening this weekend, and nothing you do is going to stop it. The legal proceedings moved at breakneck speed. Emergency hearings, competing expert witnesses, mountains of technical documentation that the judges clearly didn't understand. Both sides were spending enormous amounts of money on a case that would be decided in a matter of days. On Friday afternoon, just 24 hours before the scheduled migration, the court issued its ruling. The healthcare facilities petition was denied on procedural grounds. The judge found that they hadn't demonstrated immediate and irreparable harm sufficient to justify halting a private company's internal business operations. We had lost. The migration would proceed as planned. That evening, I sat in my home office, staring at my computer screen, feeling completely defeated. 18 years of experience, weeks of preparation, testimony from dozens of healthcare professionals, and we still couldn't prevent what I was certain would be a catastrophic failure. But then, my phone rang. Alex, it's Jennifer from Meridian. I need to see you right away. Something's happened. We met at the same cafe where I'd first spoken with Sarah weeks earlier. Jennifer looked exhausted, her usual professional composure replaced by obvious stress. "I've been fired," she said without preamble. "They found out I'd been talking to you and they terminated me immediately. But before they escorted me out, I managed to copy some additional files." She slid another thumb drive across the table. "These are the actual migration scripts they're planning to use this weekend. Alex, they're not just inadequate. They're dangerous. They're going to truncate data fields, ignore foreign key constraints, and bypass critical validation checks." I plugged in the drive and reviewed the code. What I saw was even worse than I'd imagined. The migration scripts were riddled with errors, incomplete logic, and shortcuts that would almost certainly result in data corruption. "Jennifer, this is smoking gun evidence of negligence. We need to get this to the court immediately." "There's more," she said. "I recorded a conversation between Brad and the offshore contractor team. They know the scripts are problematic, but they're under pressure to deliver on schedule. Brad explicitly told them to ignore error conditions and push through the migration even if data validation fails." The recording was devastating. Brad's voice was clear as he instructed the technical team to just get it done, regardless of data integrity concerns. He specifically said that error logs could be cleaned up after the migration was complete, and that any problems could be blamed on the legacy system design. "We have to get this to the judge tonight," I said. "An emergency motion based on new evidence." David worked through the night to file the motion, but the response came back quickly. The court would not reconsider its decision based on 11th-hour allegations that should have been presented during the original proceedings. The migration was going to happen, and there was nothing more we could do to stop it legally. But there was one more option, an option that would cross a line I'd never crossed before. I spent Saturday morning pacing my apartment, wrestling with a decision that would define the rest of my life. I had the technical knowledge to prevent the migration disaster, but using that knowledge would require me to violate computer access laws, break the NDA I'd signed, and potentially face criminal charges. On one hand, I could sit back and let the disaster unfold, knowing that I'd done everything legally possible to prevent it. When the system failed and patients